Hello, dear listener. Welcome to the Future Seeds podcast. I'm your host, Cyprian, and in this show, I explore groundbreaking solutions to our world's unique problems by connecting seemingly unrelated fields such as technology, ecology, community, and spirituality. The speaker for this episode is Paul Dunn. Paul is an incredible man. He's a master public speaker, a renowned businessman, and one of the legends that has been changing the world of business for the last decade. This episode is about his company called B1G1 Business for Good, a company that has already enabled more than 3,000 businesses to create over 150 million giving impacts around the world. This episode is also about the Sustainable Development Goals framework created by the United Nations and how being a business that contributes to the world is becoming increasingly important, so much so that the director of the International Chamber of Commerce has publicly stated that this is truly the biggest business opportunity of the century. Hello, Paul. Long time no see. You've been in Kenya.
I've been in Kenya, yes, and it's about 5 weeks or so that we last met in Bali, of all places, and here I am now in Singapore. So yeah, good to see you, literally.
And I'm in south of France.
And you know what? As we begin our chat, I mean, it just is probably appropriate. Just pause for a minute and go. Don't press your pause button. I don't mean that. I mean, if you're listening to us, what I mean is just take a listen to what we said. You know, Sip is there. I'm here. You're where you are, and through the miracle of technology, as a case in point.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Dunn. Didn't have time to introduce you. We have a story already.
Well, I'm up for being introduced. That's okay.
Yeah, Paul, you're a 4-time TEDx speaker. You're a senior fellow in one of the world's leading think tanks, and you consult to and mentor leading edge businesses around the world. And you were honored as a social innovation fellow in Singapore, same as Jet Li. And
himself, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
The great Jet Li, who's a philanthropic person. Your training programs are being used by 250,000 companies around the world, and you've been featured in Forbes alongside Sir Richard Branson in a piece on disruptors in business. And the reason I wanted to interview you today is related to one particular project you built, which is called B1G1, Buy One, Give One. Paul, could you tell our listeners what B1G1 is?
Well, B1G1 started like so many things with just this one simple little idea. And the simple idea was someone I was mentoring, that's a lady called Masami Sato. And at the time, she was a Japanese chef. Actually, she had a tiny little company in Australia, as it happened. This was in 2006, 2007, doing gluten-free frozen food. And she was way ahead of her time because she was trying to deliver gluten-free frozen food. Now, of course, delivery is part and parcel of, being alive almost, isn't it? So anyway, here we are in this mentoring session. And as you would realize, whenever you are in a mentoring session, it's usually you, the mentor, that is asking the questions. But in this particular one, she said, look, can I ask you a question today for a change? And I said, sure. And she said, well, I've been in some deep thought this past 24 hours. And you could see that, just from the look on her face. And she said, I'd love you to imagine this. She said, how would it be just imagine this world, if every time business was done, something great happened in our world? And I said, yeah, I kind of get that, but what? Give me an example. She said, well, I've been thinking about this thing for 24 hours, and I've called it Buy One, Give One. And so I said, well, how would this work? She said, well, and our listeners in Australia would know this particular store. She said, and for those of you not in Australia, it's an electrical store. So she said, well, imagine you go to Harvey Norman and you buy a plasma TV. And I said, whoa, hang on a second. It's called Buy One, Give One? She said, yes. I said, well, Masami, if I go and buy a plasma TV, they're not going to give me another one, right? She said, you don't understand. There's no way you understand. And she said, because, she said, you go and buy that plasma TV on account of how you want better vision. So how would it be when you buy that plasma TV if someone who cannot see gets the gift of sight? Oh, my goodness. And she could feel that sort of suck of air, right? And then she said, and I was drinking a cup of coffee at the time, and she said, when you buy a cup of coffee, imagine every time you did that, a child in need got access to pure life-saving water. Or how about if someone bought your book, and one of your books, and a tree got planted? And at that point, I kind of got it, right? And I said, Masami, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life? And eventually she said yes to that. And so that started me on this, amazing journey. That sounds kind of, I think most people listening to us now would go, wow, that's a cool idea. And you're right, it is a cool idea. But making it happen is not so easy, right? And it took us 3 years to do that, to figure it out. And I mean, obviously, we're still continuing to figure it out as it grows. And talking of growth, as you and I are speaking today, and it's interesting because, as you know, I talk about the power of small. Mm-hmm. And so this is this tiny little idea. Just it's amazing how tiny little ideas produce amazing impact. So as you and I are speaking today, we're at 193,547,223, to be precise, giving impacts in our world. And so every business, and there are now 3,000 or more of those businesses that are B1G1 now around
3,000?
Because it's a movement. So there are 3,000 odd, and it's growing. It's like hockey stick growth. And so every single one of those businesses, it could be a coach, it could be any business, it could be an accounting firm, it could be, it could be a dentist, it could be a doctor, it could be whatever, right? And every single one of those businesses is able to say, every time you do business with us, something great happens in our world. And they can choose what that something great is, because B1G1 now has, 527 seriously high impact projects around the world. You can give from just 1 cent. Amazingly, 1 cent makes a difference. Amazingly, too, 100% of your giving goes where you want it to go. We make that all happen. We track the giving, and of course, it's all, well, I say of course, but maybe not of course, but it's all underpinned by the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals that, Sir Richard Branson, as you mentioned, and others announced to the world on the 23rd of September 2015. So, it's
how does that work? That the projects in Beyond G1 are underpinned by the development goals. How do you?
Well, how do we do that? Well, because that's a great question. Well, remember I mentioned the 527 or whatever it is of the projects that are there. The board of B1G1, depending on the month, rejects somewhere like 9 out of every 10 of the projects that want to be a part of B1G1. And so there's this process, or for those of you listening to us in North America, process, which is, there's criteria that we have that these projects have got to meet. And
just
it's
for
not
our
easy.
Listeners, just a little precision. Paul is not talking about the companies who want to join Beyond Join, but the projects that are being funded by Beyond Join.
That's exactly correct. Thank you for that precision, as you said. Yeah. And so, it's and so all of the projects we obviously check for their sustainability, if you like. So they're sustainable, right? And so hopefully it gives people confidence that, this is right. But talking of confidence and trust, which is really, really important, and we may come back to that in a little while as we talk about this whole business for good movement, if you will, that's there. But one of the things that's really interesting, Sip, is that when we started this, we thought it was about giving. That's what we thought. We thought, and by the way, it is. I mean, it's just a very, very, very smart way to give, because no longer do you have to say, XYZ company proudly supports, some particular charity out there. No longer do you have to try and figure out, is that actually going to work? Is it safe? Is it all of those kind of things? No longer is it about the amount of money that you give, because what we do is we just measure the impacts that you're creating. So it's very different, and it's very smart, because it's linking activities in your business to things. So, for example, you and I have been exchanging emails in this past couple of days, right? And you know that every time I send you an email, a child gets access to education, right? Because that's right on the bottom of my email, right? And that's what I do as a B1G1 member, almost, right? So it's really, really good. But here's the interesting thing, and we only realized this, by the way, about 3 years ago. So we used to say it's all about the giving, and it's really cool, and people go, wow, it's really cool. But then we started to ask questions of the people who were using B1G1, and there were a couple of things going on. The first thing was that people were saying, this is a movement. They were using that word, right? And then the second thing that they were saying is, when they were talking to other people about why they should be in B1G1 sort of thing, they would say, by the way, this transformed our business. Now just think about that for a minute, because that's huge. That a business owner would say, this, whatever this is, right, this transformed our business. That's huge. And so we were taken back by that. Seriously, we didn't expect that. We knew great things were happening, but we didn't think people would express it that way. And then we said, well, what do you mean? It transformed your business. Why? What happened? And here's what they said. What they said, and they continue to say, is this: it shifts the spirit of our business. And that is so profound, so profoundly important, and so important to get. Because
that was my next question, actually.
Yeah, go.
It was like, is B1G1 more than just a system that makes philanthropy easier? And you just answered that. It actually goes further, and it transforms the world of business.
Yeah, it does, and in so many ways. And see, just go with that shift the spirit thing, just for the minute, right? And I think that phrase "shift the spirit" is kind of an interesting phrase, because what it talks about is see, I think that building a business, or for that matter, building anything, but let's talk about building a business, is all about connection. It's connection. It's not about marketing and advertising and selling. It's about connection.
Coming from a marketing guy.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's right. But see, and then people say, oh, exactly. So, well, you're a marketing guy, so you're talking about marketing and connecting with the customer. Yes. But before that can happen, and here's the point, before that can happen, you've got to be doing something that connects to yourself. And it's that connection to yourself that is that shifting of the spirit. So what happens, just because you're doing all of this in B1G1 and you've now got a greater sense of meaning, you've got a greater sense of purpose, you're seeing it happen every day in front of your eyes, you're feeling fantastic about what's happening, not because necessarily, oh, look at the revenue. I mean, we have people in B1G1, meaning B1G1 members, who don't even have revenue goals. That's amazing. So if they don't have revenue goals, what do they have? They have giving goals. Seriously. And
Wow.
and and so imagine you're working in one of these companies, right, that has the giving goals. Guess what the question is? You don't say, well, how much money did we make today? That's not the question you ask. You say, what was the giving like today? You know, and you get that it's just a different feeling.
At the end of the day.
That's right, and and I think just before you and I pressed the record button, right? You were talking to me about a movie, right? You were talking to me about the 2040 movie, but let's go back a little bit in time, see, because I think the thing that allows B1G1 to exist is what's happening in our world. And what's happening in our world is, if you go back to 2008, and if you've watched The Wolf of Wall Street, you barely can watch it, can you? I mean, it's like, really?
Oh my God.
People were doing that? Yes, people were doing that, right? And it was like the end of an era, right? Because that whole era up to that was all about literally greed is good. I mean, that's what people were saying. Greed is good, right? It's all about the money, money, money. And so go look. So if you think that's what it's all about, go watch the movie, right? Because everything tumbles down, right? It does, right? And so that was when, we probably could track it back a little bit before that, but that's when I think there's this kind of movement, if you will, towards meaning and purpose really started to happen. Because up to that point, at that point, people. Today, let's just look at today, right? If we think about Australia as for example, right? If we look at today, there's never been anything like it. We know that the latest figures I have, they may have changed a little bit, say that every hour of every day, 64 new businesses are being created in Australia, right? That's a lot. Okay. Now, another friend of mine who actually registers businesses says it's actually more than that, right? So, but anyway, let's imagine it's 64 for the sake of discussion. Now, why is that happening? Why has it never been at that level? Well, there's all sorts of reasons, but I think that one of them is that people are, and this is not sort of like an anti-corporate thing, some of them are working in corporations, and in Australia you've had in Australia all these things like the Royal Commission into Banking and all of those sorts of things, right? Just recently. So you have people who are working very hard, who are being paid very well, and appropriately so, hopefully. And what's happening? What's missing in all of that? Well, what's missing is when they get home at night, and hopefully, people listening to us right now may know someone like this. They get home at night, they put their head on the pillow, and just before they go to sleep, which sometimes is difficult for them to do, just before they go to sleep, they say, is that all there is? Seriously, is that all there is? And the answer is, it's not all there is. There's meaning, there's purpose, and so what we're now seeing, and you're a good example of it. What we're seeing is people who want to start new enterprises, and it's never been easier to do that. Never in our entire life has it been easier to do that. But to start new enterprises that have meaning and purpose, literally front and center.
So
and that's why that's all happening.
You think B1G1 exists and is flourishing because the world has changed? Like, it would not have been possible 30 years ago.
It would. I think not. Yeah, it wouldn't be. People say, "What is this all about?" Why would you want to do that, right?
Right.
And we're seeing amazing things, happen in the world. We're seeing on Wall Street. We're seeing corporations now, literally. It's called, what's it called? The Business Council, I think, which is like 185 of the top as in, revenue-wise, companies in the world, and they had this credo, this thing that bound them together, and they rewrote it. They rewrote it about 2 months ago. You could never have imagined that they would rewrite it, because when it was originally written, it was all about the shareholders. It was all about the shareholders' rights to do this and so on and so forth. Yeah. Guess what it's now about? It's about the employees, right? And it's about purpose, and it's about meaning. And so this is happening. It's there. So, and I'm happy that B1G1 is playing a part in that.
That's awesome. Give us more good news about the corporate world changing. I love this stuff.
Well, there's so much good stuff, and it depends what you listen to, as to so. Yeah, here's a thought. I remember saying this, I think, to you when we last met. Right. So a friend of mine, Dan Priestley, who runs Dent, or the Key Person of Influence program as well. Dan said to me a fair while ago, he said, Paul, you've got to figure out that your environment dictates your performance, right? And I get what he's meaning. He's meaning that if I go and work at Google for a week, I'm probably going to be a little more creative than, some other place, right? Some accountant's office, right? But Seth Godin put it rather nicely. He said the narrative dictates your performance as well. That is to say, what is it that we're listening to is also dictating it. And there is such good news out there. I think B1G1 is a good news story. I think people, I was reading yesterday about Paul Polman, who's a friend of B1G1. He used to be the CEO of Unilever. We all know Unilever, Dove soap and all that kind of stuff. It's a huge company. And Paul Polman is regarded as one of the most. He left Unilever in January this year. Actually, he announced that he was going to leave in January, but it was a little later than that. And so here's this zillion-dollar company, right? And in the time, and he completely changed their value chain, completely changed it by working on purpose. And what was the result? Something like an increase of 300% in shareholder returns. And so, wow. Yeah, and now Paul is now, he was at the United Nations with Greta the other day, and with President Macron in France, actually, at the G7. And at the G7, here's what he did. He got together at the G7, he got together the top, the top fashion brands in the world, together with President Macron. And the reason he got them together at the G7 was to have them commit to, we need to change what we do. And they did, by the way, right? So we need to change the work practices. We need to, we need to change the use of water. We need to change all of those things, right? So that's happening at that level. Paul Polman, now is the chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce. And so, a lot of stuff going there. He's now formed a high-level company called Imagine, funnily enough, Imagine. And the concept, his concept on this one is really cool. And one of the things he talks about is what it needs is a brave CEO. Right? I love that concept of a brave CEO. And then, outside you build that infrastructure around it. But it takes a brave CEO to get out there and do it. And the point, I think, to answer your question, there are more brave CEOs out there now than there ever have been. And yeah. By the way, part of the reason for that is that it is also market driven. I mean, if you look at every study that's been done in the last 10 years on what is it that consumers want, right? And if you believe the studies, right, if you believe them, but the latest study, there's another Gallup one that confirms this, says this. It says 84% of customers, of consumers, specifically consumers, want to deal with a company that is socially responsible. That's what the numbers say. Interestingly enough, when you look at so that's the consumer end of it. What about team member end of it? Well, when you look at where do team members want to work, they know if they and I don't like using words like millennials and everything else, but the study said 78% of millennials want to work with a company that is meaningful and purposeful, which explains why. Last year, get this, Unilever had 1 million job applications. So,
wow, not to process.
So yeah, we are in a very exciting time. Certainly, there are glitches in our world, and we know where to look for those. But there's some great things happening.
There's a lot happening in everything: investment, philanthropy, political structures. Yes.
Well, talking of investment, right? Someone said to me in Christchurch about 18 months ago. This was an investment banker, and he said, "Paul, are you aware of what's happening in investment banking?" And I said, is in impact investing. And I said, yeah, I know what impact investing is. And he said, yes. He said, in Australia in the last 2.5 years, we've seen a 715% increase in impact investing. And yesterday saw the issue in Europe of the first SDG meaning Sustainable Development Goals, the first SDG-linked bond in the European market. Let me just read what it says here. It's called the SDG-linked bond, an innovative corporate financial instrument that aims to contribute to the achievement of the goals. Listen to this. The 2.5 billion bond released by the energy company Elon on Thursday, listen, here's the good bit, was almost 4 times oversubscribed, signaling a strong demand for SDG-related investment opportunities. And it follows awesome. That. Isn't that amazing? And they just issued a bond in the US, which raised $1.5 billion. Again, we could not have imagined a world where that would be happening.
You just mentioned impact investment, and I wanted to place in this interview the definition of impact entrepreneurship, and I haven't had the opportunity to do that. So this is what it says on Virgin's website, Virgin by Richard Branson. We define impact enterprises as companies that have the objective to create maximum positive impact for the customers, employees, business partners, and the public at large, as well as the environment. For an impact enterprise, profit, turnover, and growth serve as a means to get sufficient capital from investors to sustain the positive impact generation of the company. They are subordinate to creating maximum positive impact.
Read that last line again? The last line that you just read.
They are subordinate to creating maximum positive impact.
There it is, right there. That's it. Yeah. And see what is reading and is like the inverse, literal inverse of what it was in 2008, which was essentially, who cares about the impact? Let's just make as much money as we can, right? And look where that got us. So that definition is a fabulous definition.
Yeah, straight to the point. And now we see so many training structures for impact entrepreneurship, and it's getting into companies. It's related to sustainable development goals. There's grants, there's investors, and there's co-working spaces all over the world who are encouraging working and hackathons. So how much?
Yeah, my son was in a hackathon recently where you had to do something in this hackathon that was really cool in relation to the SDGs, and so the SDGs were underpinning the hackathon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've done some of that in a dojo in Bali. Have you visited dojo? Great co-working space.
Oh no, I know of it, but I haven't visited, but I know of it. Yeah.
How much of the world's business do you think is currently being divested to impact entrepreneurship?
Ooh, you'd probably, I'm sure someone knows the answer to that, and I certainly don't. But here's the answer that I've got, which is 100% of the people that I talk to are doing it, right? So,
right.
But then again, that's a very biased view, and
True.
And what we're seeing is, so much. I mean, who could have thought that we'd be talking about a thing called impact investing? Who could have thought that we'd now be seeing consultancies like Paul Polman's, the one Imagine starting up, which is talking about a brave CEO. Who could have imagined that? Who could have imagined? I mean, you can now. Seriously, in Australia, I know you can do this because I know someone who's done it. You can actually go on Amazon, on Google, and you can say SDG consultants, and you can find, hundreds of people who are presumably consulting the governments and everything. By the way, for all the SDG consultants that might be listening to us, just say to your client, join B1G1. It's a really cool.
I will.
That's the answer to the question, right there.
Definitely going to do that. But so this brings me to my last question, I guess, which is more. It's a deeper question. It's more philosophical. So I'm going to speak a bit more here. It's a question about money and capitalism. And capitalism is being increasingly criticized these days. And some people say it has even started to fall. And so in an article I found called Pros and Cons of Capitalism in the intelligenteconomist.com, it says these are all the cons of capitalism. Marginalizations. So in a highly competitive capitalist economy, there would be no place for elderly, children, disabled. There would be no incentive to do that. Externalities. Capitalism ignores negative externalities such as pollution and damage to health and monopoly. And inequality. So in 2016 in the USA, the top 1% of Americans pocketed 85% of total income growth. And it seems to me that what you're trying to do with B1G1 is to transform the system, capitalism, and divert it when you say business for good. And I know from my recent years that I've seen in people who get into impact entrepreneurship, I see both people who have always embraced capitalism and just want to transform a bit their practices to do something good in the world, and people who hate it, people who dislike capitalism and see in impact entrepreneurship a way of getting a bit of reconciliation and to tolerate the system as it is.
That's absolutely correct. I absolutely can understand that. Good on them, too.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, sorry, go on. You're going to finish your point. Go, and then I'll tell you.
Yeah, I wanted to know, because you were talking about how the whole world of business was changing just before. And I want to know how much you think the actual structures of the system are a hindrance to that change. What you actually think about the system, turning it to become good.
Well, let me talk about two things that I'm very familiar with, which happen in Singapore. Okay, so here's the first thing. Let me do this chronologically. Okay, so chronologically, big word for this time of day. So chronologically, in time sequence, going back, let's see, 6 years. We, meaning B1G1, at the time were in a place called we were in the research area of the NTU, which is the sort of tech-focused university here in Singapore. And there were students there who did all sorts of research. And one day, I get this note from the student body that said, "We want to interview you because we're doing this survey on behalf of the government." So okay. So I remember very clearly we sat down at this table, and I'm having a cup of coffee, and that's twice I've said coffee. I must get one after this, I think, but as long as it's the right sort of coffee, because there's all sorts of things, by the way, going on with coffee. Oh gosh. Anyway. So and chocolate as well. Oh, terrible stuff. Anyway, yeah. So this guy says, look, the government in Singapore, which, by the way, is a very benevolent government. He didn't say that. That's me saying that. We're doing a survey on social business. This is the phrase that Muhammad Yunus used to describe impact business. He calls it a social business, right? Muhammad Yunus, he of Nobel Peace Prize, he of the first guy to do microfinance and all of that kind of stuff, right? So they said, so here's the question that the government has asked us to ask you, which is, do you think that the government should look at special incentives for social businesses? And I said, well, actually, no, which I must admit surprised the researcher. And he said, well, why would you say that? He said, you're the only social business who said no to that question. And I said, well, it's very simple. Because I think in 10 years, every business will be a social business. So that's probably a bit of a stretch because that's only 3 years away. But that's what I believe. I seriously believe that we are so moving this way that it is going to become the norm. So that's my first chronological one. Let me update that to, in fact, later this week I'm meeting with some of the people involved in this. Here in Singapore, we have a sovereign fund, like all countries do, which is, where all the taxes go and then they invest it and all of that kind of stuff. In Singapore, it is called Temasek, spelt like Temasek. And Temasek now are every single, you talked about impact investing, every single one of the investments that our government in Singapore makes now has to be in line with the SDGs. Has to be. Okay, that's the government is saying it. So once you get that, and then once you get the amazing power of the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals to really, really, really do amazing things and to pull business, if that's the way of saying it, to pull business in this way, then the world we have is going to be like a very, very, very different place. And in fact, if I can find it, let me see if I can find it. Paul Polman. Oh, here we go. Yes. Paul Polman, who I mentioned, the former CEO of Unilever. And he was at the SDG Biz Forum, the one at which Greta was at, in Geneva. In New York. And he said this. This is the former CEO of Unilever, talking about where we're at and talking about the implementation of the global goals. Here's what he said. It's a pretty simple sentence. He said, "This is probably the biggest business opportunity we have seen in the history of mankind." As we said. Now, when you get that, and when you get that is the guy who's the chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, then you would come to my view. I think that this just is where the world is going, and I'm so thrilled and privileged that I can be a part of it too.
It reminds me of something you told us in Bali, actually, when Richard Branson spoke at the UN in 2015.
Yeah.
That it was the first time, I think he said that the UN said publicly that it wasn't governmental structures that changed the world. It was the business world.
They absolutely acknowledged it for the first time, right? Up until that time, you had things like, we all got excited, you may remember, by the Millennial Goals and all those kind of things. And they were things that required governments to sign off on. That was it. And, Branson stood up and said exactly what you just said. He said, the reason I'm here is because it's the first time, 23rd of September 2015, that the world body has acknowledged that it's not listen again, that it's not governments that change our world. Certainly they can enable it, right? But it's not governments that change our world. It's businesses, business owners, their teams, people listening to this podcast.
Because the way I think I know my a little bit my audience. I'm going to try and get a bit of precision there. It's the business world that changes the world, primarily because it's actually people's passions. It's what they want to do in the world. That's what's the main engine in the world. As governments only do management.
That's right, exactly. And I forget who it was said this, but it's probably Seth Godin actually. But I have a feeling it wasn't Seth. But anyway, it's the kind of thing that Seth would say. And he said, this is not about marketing. He said, it's not about advertising. He said, go out and find a big enough problem and then start to fix it, and the world will be the path to your door. Very simple.
That's awesome. I think that's a good last word for our interview.
Hey, listen, thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for accepting to do this interview, Paul. Really like your point of view.
Thank you.
And everyone listening to this, get onto your computer, get onto the browser, type b1g1.com. You'll be directly redirected to b1.1/business for good. You won't have a choice. And check out all the amazing projects that B1G1 are funding at the moment, how you can be part of this. It's one of the best things you can do with your company at the moment.
That's nice of you to say, but I also think it's true too. Hey, thank you for being there. Thank you for asking such great questions, and also give. Most times when people interview you, they sometimes they don't ask the greatest of questions. Yours were great, but what I found was really interesting, by the way, is that you also had a view. You also were able to talk about some of the research that you've done that, talks about capitalism and all those sorts of things. So hopefully that made it a really great experience for the people listening, and it certainly made it a great experience for me. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have been here.
Thank you so much, Paul. And have a good evening privilege in Singapore.
Okay. Catch you soon.
Bye.
The Future Seeds podcast is a project that is supported by its community of listeners. If you like the show and what it stands for, I invite you to head to www.futureseeds.news, where you can support the show for just $2 a month, be part of the Future Seeds community, connect with its amazing members and speakers, and enable this podcast to thrive. I thank you for your time and hope you enjoy the show and its exploration of alternative solutions to the world's greatest challenges.